And today's special guest is Professor Kim V. Tran from UNSW Physics. She's an amazing woman that has been around the world conducting research in astrophysics. But before we go ahead, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands of which we work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting. And I pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and recognize and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal people and the ongoing cultures and connection to the lands and waters of UNSW. So, welcome to our first installment of the 2020-2021 AIAA Speaker Series podcast. Could you please introduce yourself, Professor Tran?
Hi, Rami. Thanks, first of all, for the invitation. And I also want to acknowledge the first Americans where I am. I'm actually calling you from Seattle, Washington in the US, where where I spend a lot of my time as well. And I'm hoping to get back to Sydney as soon as travel restrictions ease a little bit. But it's great to be here. And I'll give you the short version of my narrative, which is I went to school in the US and then I did postdoctoral positions in Europe, the US, and then I took a faculty position in the US, but then there was an opportunity to join UNSW. And I was very keen on that because I have a lot of collaborators in Australia who I work with on various projects. And I love Australia. I had been traveling there fairly regularly up until the chance to join the faculty at UNSW. And so I figured it was just too good an opportunity to pass up. But in terms of my background in research, I've definitely been focused on research ever since I was a graduate student. I went to grad school at the University of California in Santa Cruz, which is actually a really well-known astrophysics program. Sometimes I'll mention it and people think it's a party school. I'm like, yeah, it's also known as a party school, but it's actually really one of the top programs in astrophysics, primarily because of a long history with the observatory in California and now in Hawaii. And from there, I went and did research in Switzerland and also in the Boston area, and then moved on to faculty position in Texas. And then from there, joined the faculty at UNSW. But my research really is using observatories, ground in space, which is very relevant to what you guys do, and to look at how galaxies like our Milky Way form. And the way I do that is by looking at objects that are very, very far away at different distances from us. And by the fact that light has a finite travel speed, the farther away an object is, the farther back in time I'm looking. So the younger the universe is correspondingly. And so I'm able to then hopefully gather essentially a photo album of different galaxies at different stages of their lives, and then try to help me understand how galaxies like our Milky Way and our other neighbors like the Andromeda Galaxy also form. And so I use powerful telescopes because the light from these objects is very faint. So I use from the ground observatories like the Very Large Telescope in Chile, which is run as part of the European Southern Observatory, and then Keck observatories in Hawaii. And then of course the Hubble Space Telescope, the Spitzer Space Telescope, and hopefully very soon, the James Webb Space Telescope that should be launched later this year, which we're all very excited about and hoping that will go well. So yeah, I've always been really interested in the universe and looking at galaxies because they're just beautiful. And at the same time, they contain a lot of physics that helps us understand physics both on the small scale, but also to the largest scales, of course, which is the universe as a whole.
Wow, you've been all over the world and you've been everywhere. So thank you for the introduction. That'll give everyone a good insight to your expertise. And starting off with our first question, as every space enthusiast asks each other, when did you get interested in space and what made you decide that you were going to go into space as a career?
So I actually, no, I wanted to study astrophysics until I went to university. My background and all the way up to year 12 was really, I did arts, but then I also did science. So I had a very strong maths background and physics background, but I also really loved the arts. And so the humanities and dance, etc. And so when I went to university, I took a range of courses and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. But then I took an astronomy course, and that was when I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. I really want to learn more about this. And the university I went undergrad is the University of Arizona, happens to also have a very strong astrophysics program. In fact, you may know one of their alums, Brian Schmidt, who is a Nobel laureate over at ANU, also was at the University of Arizona. And
Oh,
he's,
wow.
yeah, he won his Nobel as part of the discovery of dark energy. And so I was very fortunate to be in a university that had a very strong astro program. And so
AIAA
basically,
UNSW Speaker Series. We are joined today with Squadron Leader Ryan Kell from the Royal Australian Air Force. And last week we had CEO of Sabre Astronautics, and the week before that we had Professor Kim Vai from the Department of Physics. Bit of housekeeping for today. This will be hosted by myself and Ryan, and we'll be chatting to each other, and any questions that people would like can go to the Zoom chat, or if you're on YouTube, you can ask the questions through that chat there. As this is just between us, for the recording, cameras will be turned off for all participants. However, if you do have any questions, when I give the signal, people can unmute their mics and ask questions near the end. But before we go any further, I'd like to do acknowledgement of country. So I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting or webinar. I pay respect to the elders past, present, and emerging, and recognise and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal people and the ongoing cultures and connection to the lands and waters of Australia. So, Ryan, I'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Ryan Kell. I'm an armament engineer in the Royal Australian Air Force. Yeah, I guess what that means, I'm sure we'll get into in a whole bunch of detail, but I'm really glad to speak to everyone. It's Department of Defense sometimes is a little bit of a black box. So I was sort of talking to Ravi earlier. Without sort of getting access to people who sort of work in the department, sometimes it's hard to get an understanding of what they do, what kind of opportunities there are, and what kind of roles that you could be doing as an engineer in the Department of Defense. So yeah, very keen to speak to everyone today. I'm probably not quite as distinguished as some of your previous guests, but I'm very glad to be here nonetheless.
Definitely a distinguished guest. Glad to have you aboard. So our first question is, you mentioned you're an armament engineer. So what exactly is armament engineering, and what is explosive ordnance, and why is it important?
Yep. So explosive ordnance is sort of the collective term for any energetic material that's used in the defense domain. So that can be things like weapons and ammunition, so bullets, propellants that fire bullets. It can also be things like propellant cartridges that might propel something like an ejection seat out of an aircraft. It could be something like a detonating cord that shatters an aircraft canopy. So they're usually used in things like emergency escape systems, as well as weapon systems, and also emergency systems, for example, things like fire bottle extinguishers. So in an aircraft context, if there's something like an aircraft fire, usually onboard aircraft fire extinguishers are electrically initiated, and there's some kind of propelling charge that breaks a seal on your firefighting sort of fluid. Yeah, so I guess explosive ordnance is the wide group term for all of those things that use an energetic material to either generate light, heat, gas, or shock for whatever purpose. And I guess the primary purpose of those is to propel things, and that could be to propel the bullet through the barrel of a gun. It could be to propel a missile off the wing of an aircraft, or it could be to propel fragments surface or hit somewhere near a target, and wants to throw some angry bits of hot metal around. So that's sort of the group term is explosive ordnance. Air Force sort of employs a category called armament engineering officers. and armament engineering officers in Air Force are the ones that deal with all of the safety and suitability for service of explosive ordnance systems, as well as maintenance, test, design type work of any systems that sort of use explosive ordnance. I guess to expand on why it's important, it's a little bit of a unique field. There's no, I imagine, it's been a while since I was in UNSW, but I imagine there's no undergrad degree in explosive ordnance or weapons or armament. And I guess the reason for that is it's a fairly broad specialization. It relies on chemical reactions, so there's sort of some chemical engineering influences. There's mechanical influences. There's aeronautical influences, of course, if you're talking about aerospace explosive ordnance systems. So there's that's sort of why it exists as its own field within the Department of Defense, because we do use a lot of energetic material, and there's no, at the moment, because there's not a huge amount of demand for explosive ordnance or armament expertise, there's really no undergrad degrees that tick off all of those things. So you sort of have to grow a bit of expertise in aeronautical sense, a mechanical sense, a chemical sense. So that's kind of why it's treated as a discrete field of engineering.
Right. Yeah, because it definitely is a niche field, because if I recall correctly, there's only about 100 to 200 armament engineers officer in the Air Force.
Yeah, the number's not huge. I think, to be somewhere between 100 and 200. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's not a huge number of people.
Yeah. So I guess coming off the back of that, so because you did a bachelor's in aeronautical engineering at the Australian Defence Force Academy, so how does that connect and how does that link with armament engineering?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think armament engineering as a field, sort of Air Force will accept candidates or people that want to join Air Force as an armament engineering officer if they've got an aeronautical engineering degree, mechanical, chemical, things like mechatronics, even electrical engineering degrees. So it's a little bit more broad in terms of the pool that we feed from. I did an aeronautical degree at UNSW at ADFA. I think they call it Canberra campus now. And it was a really good degree. One, like I've got a lot of time for the kind of thought processes that you learn by doing an engineering degree, and we can probably dig into that a little bit later if you like as well. But the foundation understanding of things like fluid mechanics, aerodynamics was all of that is a really solid foundation for someone that works in an aerospace engineering environment. Understanding things like aerodynamic controls, some things like flutter on an aircraft wing, like all of those are heavily influenced by what you might be putting on the wing, loading to the wing, I think the foundation of an aerospace degree I found particularly useful when doing a whole bunch of jobs that sort of relate specifically to weapons on aircraft systems.
Yeah, right. So yes, and then your decision to join ADFA over, like, yes, a normal civilian uni. So why did you choose a career in defense over just a civilian uni?
So it's a good question. I think people join for a whole myriad of reasons. My reasons, to be honest, were quite selfish. I think at the time, and this was probably early 2000s when I was going through sort of senior level high school, ADFA had, I think it was called an education award. It was sort of a bit of a sponsorship scholarship. You applied to join and go through ADFA. And if your marks were pretty good, they'd give you, I think at the time it was they'd give you a laptop. And I guess you guys probably weren't in high school in the early 2000s, but to have your own laptop in those days was a pretty cool thing. So I kind of applied just for the free laptop. And then by the end of year 12, it turned out it was the best offer that I had on the table at the time. So I decided to go for it.
Well, there you go. But now look, you're a squadron leader now, at the capability and acquisition group. So I guess, so how has your career been so far, like from that decision, and I guess the balance of technical engineering versus managerial roles?
Yep. So so it's been really good. Like I've probably been fairly lucky in having a few really good experiences and opportunities. Defense engineering is kind of, it's really interesting because I think especially the services, so let's say Navy, Army, Air Force, as opposed to the Australian public servants who work for the Department of Defence, but they're not serving members of the Defence Force. So for the services and the ADF, you are, if you join as an engineering officer, you are first and foremost an officer. So you're an officer, you're a leader, you lead teams of people, you manage outcomes, you manage schedules, you manage budgets, and then you sort of work your technical stream, which is doing technical engineering. Now, engineers are only really employed in roles where you need a technical skill set or a technical mindset. However, it's fairly rare. Like, there are positions out there, but there aren't too many positions in the services where an engineer is doing number crunching engineer design work. So if anyone's struggling with your third year dynamics or fluid mechanics classes and worried about potentially having to crunch numbers if you decide you want to join the Defence Force, I wouldn't be too concerned about that. So a lot of the roles are like technical in nature. Like every day I'm using principles of my undergraduate aeronautical engineering degree. I've been lucky enough to do a Masters of Science over in the UK. And every day I'm using the principles that I gained through all of that foundation education. But what I'm not doing is usually sitting there crunching numbers in a spreadsheet or writing code in MATLAB or using CFD tools or FEM to try and solve some of the problems we face.
Yes. Yeah. So good.
It's you definitely lead people. Like it's one of the only places where, as a graduate, you will be put in charge of a team and you will be leading a team. Sometimes that team might only be 1 or 2 people. Sometimes the team might be 6 to 10. Sometimes the team will be a 65, sort of 70, 80 plus person maintenance shift where you're managing safe maintenance on, let's say 15 to 20 aircraft that are out there. Having maintenance done on them on a flight line, and having pilots come and go and take jets out for a spin and then bring them back. And so that's where I think, like, some of the opportunities in defense to really grow your leadership skills is probably a fairly unique experience in comparison to some of the industry focused jobs that you might do as a graduate. So you might work as a grad engineer for sort of doing like process engineering or like production or maybe some design engineering work for sort of 4 or 5 years before you start getting to the point where you're sort of like senior design engineer, and then you might be leading a team or managing a team from that point onwards. Defense sort of forces you to grow up fairly quickly in that regard. Yeah, which sometimes is good. It's sometimes not so good, but I guess experiences vary.
Yeah, because I guess a big thing like is what you said about, like, because I know people, including myself, struggle with the whole coding and the more technical things. So I guess it's good that there's not too much of that in defense. But I guess to build off, because I know, like, I've spoken to some people, they've always considered joining the defense force, but I guess from your perspective of you've worked there for quite a while now. So do you think more university students should be looking to defense like as a pathway? Why or why not?
Yeah, okay. It doesn't feel like that long. I'll give you the hot tip. I think I graduated my degree at the end of 09.
And 9. Oh,
Yeah, 2009. So yeah, started working from 2010. So like really, well, yeah, I'll say only been 11 years. 11 years doesn't feel like a long time, but I'm sure, yeah, to undergrads trying to struggle their way through, what was it, 3 weeks out of exams you guys are? Yeah, I imagine,
yeah.
yeah, 11 years feels like a long time. So yeah, I think so. Defense is I definitely, anyone who's considering joining defense as an engineer, I would certainly encourage it. I think the opportunities are significant. Oh, what have I done? I think I've spent probably a total of about 10 or 11 months in the US in my second year after graduating. And then I've had a 12-month posting to the UK. Yeah, Department of Defense, yeah, picked me and my family up, moved us all over to the UK for 12 months, did a fully paid for master's course just out of Oxford. So some really good opportunities for professional development. I think defense is fairly good at yeah, at trying to retain the best and brightest talent that they have. With Yeah, like I've lived in a bunch of different places. So went to university in Canberra, worked for 1 year in Canberra after uni while my wife finished off her uni degree. She's an engineer in the RAF as well, and she's an
Oh,
aerospace or an aeronautical engineer. So yeah, her focus is airframe structures, engines, hydraulic mechanical systems. Um, Whereas I specialized in weapons sort of from there. So yeah, we've lived in Canberra, lived in Newcastle for 6 years, lived in the UK for a year, lived in sort of just outside Brisbane for 2.5 years, and now we moved back to Canberra at the end of 2019, and we'll be here for probably another 1 or 2. So opportunities to live in different places, to see different things. I had the opportunity to deploy on operations in Kabul, Afghanistan, and that was doing what might not sound like a very engineering technical role, but it was working in countering improvised explosive devices, so IEDs. I'm sure you would have heard about them in the news. Yeah, so for Air Force, it's our armament engineering and armament technical categories are the ones that provide a bomb disposal or explosive ordnance disposal capability for Air Force. And that saw a lot of Air Force people deploy on operations to support the fight against IEDs and those that manufacture them, those that emplace them. So that was an excellent experience in terms of opportunity to work. That was working in one of the NATO-led headquarters. So it was US, Germany, Netherlands. Yeah, it was, I guess, most of the NATO countries. It was, yeah, really good to be able to build a network across all those people and work with some of the best from all of those countries to, yeah, achieve some really good things. And yeah, I guess the whole intent was to try and save as many lives as possible and stop these IEDs from working. So yeah, huge array of experiences. Like yeah, as well as that, like I've worked in flight line jobs where you're standing there, you're a manager of maintenance. You've got a bunch of maintenance crews out there on a flight line working on jets. There's guys refueling. There's fighter pilots coming up, handing over aircraft. They're taking off, doing their thing, and then coming back. Yeah, I've worked as sort of in a more generalist role as a executive officer for a squadron. So that's more of a coordinating type function. And that unit specifically was the Air Force unit that does airfield engineering. So sort of the civil engineers of Air Force and the bomb disposal guys. So that was a really good experience. That was leading a team from a whole bunch of different backgrounds. I was managing HR people, I was managing finance people, logistics people, operations planning people, and then the guys that actually do the work. So sort of the, let's say, construction teams or bomb disposal teams. It was sort of, yeah, it was good exposure to leading multidisciplinary teams. And I guess those kind of skills are a lot harder to pick up sort of before the age 30, I guess, in an industry type job.
Yeah, well, that's a huge variety of roles and I guess places as well you've been. That's awesome. I would also like to just make sure anyone who had any questions in the chat, please feel free to send them in the chat. Or if you can, we have some time now, if anyone would like to unmute their mic. So we got one from Stephen. Could you talk more about your master's? What did you major in and how did it impact your career?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. So defense sponsors a bunch of different master's courses where it sees a need to have some very specialist and niche skill sets. Now, those broadly across the engineering categories include qualifications in things like flight test engineering, which is a really interesting field. It's not one that I've got a whole bunch of personal experience with, but I've got a few mates that have done that, and it sounds like really interesting, rewarding work. Some of the others are sort of down. There's some specialist structural integrity masters that are run, I think, out of Purdue University in the US, that defense sponsors. There's some in engine structural integrity and aerospace vehicle design. So, and those are sort of run across a range of unis in the US and the UK. I think defense tries to spread it out a little bit to gain, I guess, a whole bunch of experience across a whole bunch of different institutions. And then there's a couple of weapons specialist master's courses. The one I did was it was a Master of Science in Explosive Ordnance Engineering. So that degree was specifically sort of going into details of design, production, manufacture, and then employment of weapon systems and what kind of considerations you go into. So happy to dig into that in as much detail as people want to. But I'm not sure how much people want to talk about the chemistry of explosives and formulations and all that kind of stuff. And then the other one that's an armament specialist master's course is it's a Master of Science in Guided Weapons, and it specifically sort of looks at guided weapon systems. So let's say like guided missiles, what different complexities there are around those all-up rounds operating as a system, like because they've got complex avionics systems, they got complex seeker systems, they got complex multi-sensor fusion is sort of something that a lot of new weapons are sort of starting to look towards. Some of them have data links and radios to and from a weapon while it's in flight. And then you've got a warhead system, a target detection system, you've got a propulsion system, and then all of the actual guidance control steering sections. So guided weapons are a really complex thing. And there are some very niche master's courses sort of across the globe that specialize in trying to cater to that kind of market. So I did that course in the UK in 2016, over 16-17, and did it with a bunch of people from a bunch of different militaries, as well as some folks from industry, as well as some folks from public service, primarily UK public service, who work in acquisition and sustainment of British weapon systems. Yeah. Does that answer the question, Stephen? Was there anything you wanted to dig into a bit deeper?
Feel free to unmute your mic if you'd like, Stephen. To you.
Hello, does my mic work?
Yep, we can hear you.
Cool. No, that pretty much answers it. Thanks.
Awesome.
No worries.
I mean, I would be interested to learn more about specifics, but I don't want to steal the whole show, with that.
No, that's all right. Well, Ravi's got my contact details. If anyone wants, to hear anything more, there's probably a couple of resources I can flick across to Ravi and even answer questions directly. So don't hesitate to get in touch with him afterwards if you've got any follow-ups.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So another question from the Zoom chat. What do you think is the most important skill to lead a team effectively?
Yeah, like, so leadership's one of those things you sit through all of the classes while you're at ADFA or you're at an officer training school or similar, and everyone throws out all kinds of different theories of leadership and what it's all about. I guess the one takeaway that I've had from the whole thing is humans are social animals where we like to deal with people as much as engineers might not always like to deal with people. Dealing with people is important. And I think so much of leading a team comes down to being a person. Be a person, understand where everyone in the team is coming from. That's the only way to really build trust inside a team. And once you've got the trust of your team as a leader, then you'll understand where your whole team's coming from, and people will be much more willing to be able to go out on a limb and really do some good work. So that's I think the biggest skill is just learning how to be a person and engage well with people.
Yeah, awesome. I guess back to more of the career type research stuff. Because a lot of the students here are mostly third year, fourth year above. So what research could current students take part of for defense, whether that be Air Force or maybe Defense Science Technology Group?
Yeah, okay. So there's a couple of areas that I'm sure if people pay sort of close enough attention to the news, there's definitely a lot of areas that the Australian government seems to be interested in, and it's usually the areas they're interested in are the areas that they throw a bunch of money at through funding different projects or programs or research itself. So I guess a couple of those areas that I've got off the top of my head would be things like hypersonic flight. I think is going to be the next big thing. Like one in the defense sector, but two in terms of general aviation. There's a lot of really wealthy backers putting a whole bunch of money towards hypersonic commercial flight. So yeah, I reckon if you're interested in that kind of field, there's going to be a lot of demand for people that have a good skill set and good understanding of the complexities around hypersonic flight. So that would be a recommendation of mine. Of course, because I'm wearing a blue uniform and I'm a weapons guy, I've got to talk about. Government has made a couple of big announcements this year regarding the sovereign production manufacture of guided weapons in Australia. There's plenty of media releases about it if people want to hear more, but I expect there's going to be a lot of defense industry that are going to be seeking out people that have good aeronautical understanding. If manufacture of guided weapons in Australia is going to be a big part of defense industry. And I guess not just looking at weapons, I'm sure those who have seen any of the media releases about the Loyal Wingman program. So that's the first designed, developed, and flown aircraft that's been solely done in Australia since I think World War II, and that's been done purely by Boeing Defence Australia. It hasn't had a whole bunch of sponsorship, from my understanding, from Boeing, the company in the US. So that's, I think there is going to be an aerospace manufacturing, or at least a level of appetite for aerospace manufacturing in Australia, which probably hasn't existed for some time. Some of that's going to be in weapons, and I think a lot of that's going to be in hypersonic development, or development of hypersonic vehicles.
Yeah, wow. So hypersonics is definitely an interested thing that a lot of the students are into. And I guess another one is what insights can you provide about the future of space in the context for the ADF?
Right. So space is a bit difficult. I think ADF is probably still figuring out how to best structure itself to try and do what it needs to do in the space domain. I don't know the details myself, so I'd keep an eye out in whatever news articles or media releases or similar you can manage to find. but I think it's definitely an area of growth. Yeah, it's definitely an area of growth. I know the Australian Space Agency has only been started up in the last few years, and the Australian space industry is growing at a pretty rapid rate. So if that's an area that people are interested in, yeah, it's definitely going to be a growth field for probably the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. At least the rest of my working life, probably yours as well.
Yeah, right. And I guess another question from the Google Forms actually is, how did you get to this position? I think he means like, how did you get to a squadron leader?
Yep. Yeah. So defense is, I guess, as you get more senior in terms of rank in defense, your skill set or what defense needs from you or expects of you sort of becomes a whole bunch less technical, and it becomes a whole lot more generalist. And I guess what that means is that at each rank level, you'll usually do usually you change jobs every 2 or 3 years as a sort of general rule. And this isn't completely different to industry, depending on how long people want to stay in the same job. Usually people change every sort of 3 to 5 years anyway. So in defense, like at one rank, so if you're a junior officer, let's say a flight lieutenant, you might do, let's say, 3 jobs at that rank, or 3 postings, 3 positions. So between, let's say, 6 and 9 years as a junior officer. And one of those jobs will probably be in an aircraft flight line environment where you're managing jets, you're managing teams. One of them might be in a capability acquisition, so like a engineering and logistics support type role. So providing design engineering support, providing sort of supporting logistic operations for a platform, or in my case, for a weapons system. So you'll do a job there where you're using more of your technical brain, I guess, rather than your management brain. And then the other thing you might do will be sort of in like a staff headquarters, or like a planning type role. So you're either doing coordination of a bunch of different units, like how they do maintenance, how they do engineering tasks, how effective and how efficient some of those engineering tasks are, and then trying to do things like scheduling maintenance activities, scheduling maintenance planning across a fleet of 72 aircraft. So that's that'd probably be sort of the third role. So you do a bunch of different jobs where you're exercising different parts of your brain, and you're learning different set of skills from each job, so that when you promote to the next job or the next rank level, you are well skilled to be able to do a job in any one of those 3 or 4 or 5 fields. So that's sort of how it works. Like at each rank, you do a bunch of different stuff to learn a bunch of different things. And the more you learn and the more things you do, the more value you can add at the next rank. So I think, like, talking about some of the roles that I'd had in the past, I've been lucky enough to sort of do a bit of everything. And there's been a couple of promotions in there that sort of align with different I guess, progression milestones, and they lead into different jobs that are more leadership style. So I spoke before, I guess, in a bit of detail about my previous role to this, where I was leading multidisciplinary teams that do civil engineering, they do bomb disposal, they do a bunch of different stuff. My role at the moment, I'm an engineering manager for an acquisition project for weapons. So my team has procured and introduced into service all of the weapons for the F-35 Lightning II, the new Joint Strike Fighter platform for Air Force. So along with that project came a whole bunch of weapons that were procured, and that was my predecessors and myself and my team. We did all of the safety and suitability into service, safety and suitability for service assessments. So making sure that our weapons are safe to operate on the platform, safe for our maintainers to be able to prepare them and load them to a jet, and safe for our storage organization and transport organization to be able to ship them around the place to support wherever Air Force might need them. So that's sort of the 2 roles that I've had at rank. One has been very technical, like this one currently is very technical. I've got a team of 6 engineers. and they range from sort of second-year graduates through to I've got one guy who's been working as a design engineer for probably 12 or 15 years. Yeah, so this is very technical, and the previous one was not technical at all. It was very general in nature. So that's sort of yeah, and then yeah, like you do different levels of professional development to better yourself, whether that be a master's course, it could be a technical one, it could be something like an MBA. There's opportunities where defense will sponsor me to do an MBA part-time to grow my skills to make me a more effective senior manager if I happen to get promoted again. So that's what progression looks like in defense. It's breadth of skills is probably considered in favor of depth of skills, if that makes sense.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so definitely a wide range there. That's awesome. All right. We've got another question from the Google Forms. What do you think of acronyms in your field, and how have you remembered all of them?
There's a buttload of them, but I guess like anything, like if you guys took an art student and took them into one of your thermodynamics lectures, I'm sure he'd probably think you were speaking a different language. It's sort of the same for us. Like you end up working so heavily and you're so immersed in an environment that relies heavily on acronyms. So I guess, yeah, it becomes part of the language, part of the vernacular when you've been doing it for a little while. Yeah, if I have been overusing acronyms, if that was someone trying to give me a hint, I'll try and avoid it.
That's all right. And got another question from Mildred. What was your favorite job? Because you've had so many different hats. Guess which one was your favorite?
Yeah, it's pretty hard to say. I've enjoyed every job for its own merits. Like, yeah, some jobs are super fast paced. Some feel like you're achieving a whole bunch sort of every day. Some are a lot slower burning and but but arguably more important. So like I've really enjoyed everything I've done. I think doing the bomb disposal stuff was probably the most fun. I don't know if if you call it fun, I guess. It's definitely like blowing stuff up is a whole bunch of fun. And I think for anyone who joins a weapons or an armament field, there's definitely a bit of blowing stuff up. We do it for a whole bunch of different reasons, whether something becomes unsafe or whether something just gets too old. The easiest way to dispose of explosives is by blowing them up. So I've done a fair bit of that, and that's always good fun. You really learn to appreciate how powerful explosives are. But yeah, as for most fun, I don't know if I can answer. Like bomb disposal was certainly, yeah, where I've had the most fun experiences. I'll put it that way.
That's awesome. It's the question that as this is for I guess most defense personnel is how do you think about the ethics and morals behind being in a defense role where because I guess most when people join they have that obligation where if they do have to take a life, that's part of their job. So how do you deal with that within your role?
Yeah, so I guess like it's an interesting one. I guess in answering this, like I'm very glad that I'm part of the Australian Defence Force. Australia has a lot of respect for the value of life, and I guarantee that the Australian Defence Force doesn't take the use of lethal force lightly. It's certainly something that we treat with the respect it deserves. So I have the utmost confidence in everyone that I've ever worked with in terms of not, I guess, doing the wrong thing or not taking that responsibility lightly. I'll probably, yeah, I'll probably just leave it at that. But yeah, I'm
Yep.
very comfortable as part of the Australian Defence Force, rather than some other countries who I guess place less value on human life than we do.
Yep. I guess with I guess the Defence Force, as not really slogan is like it's defending Australia and its national interests. So we've got another Zoom question. Any close calls when working with explosives?
Not really close calls. Like whenever you're working with explosives, like the people that do the raw handling of explosives are very well trained. Like we manage that really well, which is why it's extremely rare that there's ever an incident involving explosives that actually results in an injury in the ADF. That said, it happens at time to time. Yeah, I can't say that I've ever had anything that I would consider a close call. Like even when you're working, like there's been times where I've worked with unexploded ordnance on, let's say, a firing range or an air weapons range, and you've got a piece of explosive ordnance that's either in a dangerous or an unknown condition. You've got to treat that with the respect it deserves. You take the precautions necessary to make sure that no one's hurt. Like we've got a whole range of procedures, practices, tools, and equipment that sort of help us make sure we don't end up in a position where we can end up getting hurt. Like usually something has got to go really badly for someone to actually get hurt when they're dealing with these things. And like that even sort of almost goes hand in hand with how we deal with things like IEDs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures that everyone's taught and trained on before you're ever put in a position where you might actually be in a dangerous situation. The training and the tactics, techniques, and procedures are so comprehensive that something really has to go wrong for someone to get hurt doing that work. And that's not to say it hasn't happened before. It certainly has. But yeah, it's the training is to a level where it reduces the amount of risk that people are exposed to significantly.
That's good. A question from they've asked, how have you ever felt overwhelmed with workload or a rough time, and how did you overcome it? I guess this could be whether during uni or during your work life.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm sure some of you guys are probably feeling a little overwhelmed now with exams coming up. So, like short answer, yes, right? Everyone gets overwhelmed from time to time. The workload can be significant. Too many assignments. I hear. Yep. So I think that it certainly happens, and I suppose in any organization, the more senior you get, the more the responsibility increases, the more leadership overhead, governance overhead, the more consequence there are to some of the decisions that you make. So it's not something that goes away, and I think like mental resilience is definitely something that everyone should be considering as part of their I won't even say professional lives, just as their lives as human beings. Like I guarantee I've had more stressful times after having kids than I have as part of day-to-day life. So yeah, I think like some of the avenues that are available, like I've sought mental health support for some issues and some times I've had in the past, and largely that was all provided through defense, which was handy. But as well as that, like there's I guess a whole range of options to try and look after your mental health. Like all of the Department of Health advice that's come out during COVID has been absolutely fantastic. Like talking about how often you should be getting outside, doing some exercise, trying to get some physical training in. That's a huge stress reducer. And then I guess seeking health support whenever you need it. The services are always there, so yeah, make the most of them if you feel like you do need them. And I guess I don't really have much more advice than that. But yeah, like it definitely happens to everyone. Everyone's human. Doesn't matter if you're the prime minister or the third year uni student.
Yeah, everyone always has a struggle every now and then. Especially for students, because do you have any advice for students that are struggling with balancing work, uni, and other things in their life? Because yeah.
Yeah, it's a fair. I guess it's not really a position I've been in. Like I've been lucky enough that sort of through ADFA you don't like you kind of get paid while you're there because you're doing a bunch of military training at the same time as your uni studies. So I've never been in a position where I've had to work a job as well as study full time. So I probably can't provide much advice on that, to be honest. But yeah, I could certainly see it being tough. Yeah.
That's all right. So we've got a question here. What do you think of mint chocolate? Tasty or toothpastey?
Ooh, it's a hard one. It's probably the hardest question so far. I'm a big fan of mint chocolate chip ice cream. I don't know if that helps.
Awesome.
But yeah, that's a mint chocolate chip ice cream I'd go for. But if the choice was mint chocolate or yeah, I don't know, maybe just some normal Cadbury's dairy milk, I'd probably go the latter.
Nice. I'm definitely a mint choc chip ice cream or chocolate fan, but we have a few people opposed to that. I guess another question. Have you ever met any animals on the job? Yes. Yeah.
Met any animals? Only sort of there's like the Air Force has the working dogs, the military working dogs, the German Shepherd sort of breed dogs for doing security stuff. Yeah, that's kind of it. Like there's occasionally, yeah, like usually security dogs or the explosive detection dogs. There's a pretty wide breed or range of breeds that are used in those kind of roles. That's the only ones that I've really had much to do with, and even then I haven't really worked closely with them.
Yeah. One from Zoom. You mentioned that sometimes people do get hurt and things go wrong in your field. As a leader, how do you handle those types of situations?
Yeah, tough one. So I've been lucky enough not to be involved in any serious injuries or accidents, which I'm pretty thankful for. But as I think you guys would all know by now, like aviation is an inherently dangerous venture or activity in itself. So yeah, like I've been lucky enough not to have to deal with any serious injuries. But yeah, I think again, like as I mentioned earlier, one of the most important skills for leadership is being a person. And I think especially in times like that, you've got no choice but to really knuckle down and understand what your team is feeling, what they're thinking at the time, and then putting whatever protective measures in place you need to be able to get everyone through a tough time if it's required. That's about all I've got for that one.
Yep. And I think you might have touched on this one before, but what is your most memorable experience in your career?
Most memorable experience.
Number one.
So yeah, okay, yeah. So I guess a couple. There was one because of some of the work I was doing with the US Army in Afghanistan. They ended up sending over a medal, which was really good. It was great to get some recognition from a foreign country for work well done. So that was pretty meaningful for me. But yeah, probably coolest memory or experience. It's I guess not really weapons or engineering related, but when I was in the UK, my wife and I got to go to Buckingham Palace and meet the Queen at one of the garden parties that she runs in her backyard. So that was really cool. Yeah,
Wow,
it was a
as you
cool
do.
experience. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, when in England. Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. I don't think I met anyone who's met the Queen, but yeah, that's cool.
It was very cool. Yeah.
Um, with your role, oh, sorry, where do you see your role playing a part in the future, say 5 to 15 years time?
I guess current role, or weapons engineers in general, or I guess engineers in general in defense is probably worth talking to.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think like engineers, like defense's want or need for engineers isn't going to go away. Where the department's procuring and government has got an appetite to procure a number of super advanced aircraft and weapon systems. I think defense engineers are going to be incredibly busy over the next 10 to 15 years trying to introduce some of these platforms into service and to make sure that they provide the kind of capability that government wants of Air Force in my case. It's going to be real busy. Yeah.
We've got another animal question. Are you a cat or dog person? Answer carefully.
Oh, now I'm scared. I'm definitely a dog person. We've got two big Labradors at home at the moment. We got a black one and a yellow one, and they are they're good fun. They shed far too much hair, but they're good fun.
Awesome. I think we do have a few cat people here, so maybe on
Right.
the wrong side of some people, but I'm sure they can let it slide. So it's a Zoom question from Kelvin. As a leader, how do you handle difficult or uncooperative team members? Have you ever had to reprimand someone, and how did you go about that?
Yeah. Okay. That's it's a pretty good question. So I guess that's part of professional life. It's something that you are required to do for a whole bunch of reasons. And yeah, I guess the approach that I like to take, or the way that I like to think about it, is like you've got to do what's best for the organization while catering for an individual's needs. So in some instances, if a person isn't suited to a particular type of work, it's not good for the organization if you keep employing them in that kind of work. And it's good for the member to find the kind of work that they enjoy doing and that they're good at. So yeah, like defense has got a couple of different means for dealing with for I guess dealing with underperforming staff. There's different kinds of performance management methods, administrative methods. There's some disciplinary methods that can be used. But yeah, I don't think it's large. I don't think it's a whole bunch different than a lot of other workplaces. I think it's just the processes are a lot more formalized. To make sure that I guess defense as a government organization isn't making bad HR decisions. A lot of the structures around that are quite robust and focused, and we've always got advice from specialists in the HR field whenever we need to make those kind of decisions.
Yeah, right. It's good there's that, I guess, concrete plan for those type of things. As we start to wrap up now, Ryan, I guess, do you have any parting words of wisdom for our audience, uni students, and everyone at AIAA? Anything at all?
Yeah, so I guess like aerospace is, like, personally, it's always been of an interest to me, and it's only going to be bigger over coming decades, right? I think everyone sees that. What I would encourage is anyone on the line who is interested in sort of positions of leadership over their time, I'd encourage them to consider defense as an option for a career. I think I've gone through some of the opportunities that I've been lucky enough to have. And I guess the final point, and there's a couple of, I've put a little bit of time sort of thinking about this as a concept over the years, but an engineer who has got people skills and can lead teams is that's a really powerful individual. You've got someone who's got all of the technical, or a lot of technical nous. They're going to make objective decisions based on data, not based on rumor or innuendo or emotion. And you've got someone who can lead teams, engage with people, inspire people to do their best work. So I've got a lot of time for engineers and engineering as a profession, and I think having engineers who are solid leaders, like that's the kind of people that we really need in positions of leadership and positions of power. So if you are inclined that way, then please make the most of that skill set. It's pretty rare.
Oh, lovely. I guess, as said before, if anyone did have any specific questions, whether it be about his masters or anything else, can redirect that to the AIAA UNSW email or Facebook page, and we can pass those questions on. Or Ryan, would it be okay if we send something for other people to contact you directly, like a LinkedIn or something?
Yeah, I don't really have any issue with direct contact. If it becomes too much, I'll just stop replying to emails. But I think you've got my work email, Ravi. So yeah, feel free to hand that out. If people have got questions about engineering and defense, yeah, definitely more than happy to talk to them.
Awesome. And I guess as we wrap up, we're now deep into week 7. This is the end of episode 3 of the speaker series with Squadron Leader Ryan Kell. Thank you so much for coming. And tomorrow we have a bit of a different event. We have Coffee with Con. He's Dr. Con Doolan is our aerodynamics specialist lecturer at UNSW. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And yeah, have a great day.